The image bearer's call is to make the world flourish. So one of the questions I always ask people is what would happen if nobody did what your work entails? So I've talked to people who are in the trash collection business. You wouldn't think it's very spiritually significant, but at the end of the day, if nobody collects the trash, there's nobody to preach the gospel to, right?
Welcome to Follower of One, where faith meets real work. We're a global community helping others move one notch closer to Jesus. Wherever you are, that's your mission field. You are a missionary. Welcome back to this episode of Follower of One. I'm your host, Addison Williams, and today we have a special guest here, Mr. Tom Lutz, who's currently living in Peachtree Corners, Georgia, with Sherry, his wife of 50 years. There's 7 adult children, and I just got word they have 16 grandchildren with one on the way. So they're going to be having a full team. Mr. Tom Lutz, thank you for joining us on today's show.
It's great to be here, Addison. And
You
by
know,
the way, it's 51 years now.
it is 51 years. Okay.
That's right. I gotta update that note.
That is fantastic. Well, congratulations on
Thank
51
you.
years
Thank
of
you.
marriage. That is quite the feat. Tom, we've talked a lot about your accolades. I wanted to start with your family first because, quite frankly, family and faith are the most important things that we could consider whenever we think about the Christian life. So, Tom, I'm going to quickly
Oh, sure.
introduce you from a business perspective because you have quite the accolades there as well. And celebrating not only family, but business as well. You're the president of Vision Planners, LLC. You're a chair of Convene in Atlanta. And you're also a professor of biblical studies at Metro Atlanta Seminary, a graduate of the University of Maryland in classical languages and Covenant Theological Seminary with a Master's of Divinity and a Divinity of Ministry. Tom founded a Reformed Presbyterian church in Baltimore before launching a global construction information firm that grew to $120 million in revenue across 18 countries. And later, as I mentioned, he founded Vision Planners to help churches, nonprofits, and businesses realize their visions. Last but not least, he's actually the author of Equipping Christians for Kingdom Purpose in Their Work. And listeners, as much as Tom loves to talk about everything he's done, we're going to hit everything from a theological perspective to a Christian in the marketplace perspective, all the way down to his new book that's coming out, which is very exciting. It's very encouraging because, Tom, you have not only so much wisdom to share in conversation, but also with all of that wisdom, you bring it very practical. So, Tom, once again, thanks for being on the show. You have quite a track record, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you this afternoon.
I'm excited to hear me talk after what you just said. This is going to be, I want to meet this guy.
I want to meet this guy too. It's fantastic. So, Tom, obviously, with your background in ministry and the heart for the church, let's just say, I'd love to first cast a picture for how did faith get started in your world? What really set the tone for how dedicated you've been to the Christian faith, not only personally, but professionally as well?
Yeah, well, interesting question. It goes back to I was raised in a family. My dad was Methodist, mom was Catholic, but a very believing family. Mom read us Bible stories every day. We prayed every day. And then it was in young life, so it was in the 60s when some of us got a little bit crossways with legalities. We won't go into that. But I had the opportunity to participate in a young life group in Randallstown, Maryland, which is where we lived at the time, where I was raised in Baltimore, and had an opportunity to go to Frontier Ranch in, I think it was Buena Vista, Colorado, if I'm remembering correctly, and just heard really the first clearest presentation of the gospel, and just said, that's something I want to be part of. And then it was a period of years trying to sort out one of the early I won't call it a struggle. One of the early processes I went through was I had a lot of people saying to me, if you want to serve God, you'll become a pastor. And so that sort of set me on the theological track. When I often earned my master's of divinity, but then realized, with 19 years of experience, what do you do? Went and helped start a church plant in the inner city of Baltimore. Um, Figured if I was going to be a pastor, it was going to be an adventure. And then basically, it was after a couple of years there, I had an opportunity to be kind of bivocational, pastor of the church, but also help start the business, which you just mentioned, which grew quite large. And I always tell my pastor friends, after several years as a teaching elder, God called me to the ministry, and that ministry was in the workplace.
That's really good. You and I both know, I feel like it can be very easy to think that only those that are talking to us on Sunday mornings are the pastors and we
Hmm.
just go to work. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the
Yeah.
Sunday. What happens from Sunday to Monday in your perspective? How can you encourage people to start thinking, man, let's be a missionary in the marketplace on Monday morning and take what we learned on Sunday and apply that?
Yeah. So in my particular, so that first book of my Equipping Christians for Kingdom Purpose in Their Work it came out of my doctoral dissertation, which is on that very question, is how do we talk to people whose primary calling is outside the church to help them understand that that too is ministry, every bit as much as what happens nights and weekends. Um, and I did some qualitative research with a group of men I was discipling, and noticed that these were particularly mature believers. A lot of them were elders in their churches. But yet, when we started studying what the Bible says about their call as an image bearer, essentially as a worker, there was significant spiritual growth because for the first time, and these were men in their 40s through 60s, probably, for the first time in their lives, they began to realize that spirituality applied to all aspects of their life, not just what they did at church.
How would you cast the vision? Obviously, that was a book that you had written. What is an easy synopsis for that to say a listener on the Follower of One podcast? Obviously, they're encouraged to live out their faith in the marketplace. What would be the first step, if you would say, for somebody that's thinking, what do I do? How do I go about this without
Well,
being a Bible thumper?
they should obviously buy that book.
They should buy that book. Yes, that's step
That's
one.
right.
Step two, keep
That's step
listening to
two,
this
read it.
podcast. That's true. Now we're
um,
talking.
no, for me, the formative concepts is learning to read the Bible in what I call an image bearer context, not a church centric context. And that goes back to when we were created, every one of us was created as a worker, which means, Adam and Eve, God, every day he created something and said it was good. And then finally he puts the image bearer in the garden and then changes his mind. He says, now it's very good. And that is because God loves the world, right? This was his masterpiece, which he wanted to, we use the term flourish. The image bearer's call is to make the world flourish. So one of the questions I always ask people is what would happen if nobody did what your work entails? So I've talked to people who are in the trash collection business. You wouldn't think it's very spiritually significant, but at the end of the day, if nobody collects the trash, there's nobody to preach the gospel to, right? There's just those kinds of things, and we have to stop thinking about it as tiered or as leveled and start to thinking about a mosaic. God wants the world to flourish. In order for it to flourish, people have to preach the gospel on Sunday. But also, in order for it to flourish, people have to open restaurants that serve quality food. People have to collect the trash. In other words, everything flourishing comes when everybody does what God's called them to do. And that's so I think of that as the mosaic of the church. The church is when everybody's doing that which God's called them to do.
That is a beautiful picture. I'm reminded of a couple of scriptures. I'm going to paraphrase, but one that I
Yep.
think about is there are many parts to the body and there's one body in Christ. And specifically, I and one of my friends, we say that we have the gift of gabs. And at some point, every body part has to be connected by something. And we're the connecting
Hmm.
piece to that. We're the ones that's
Right.
bridging
Yeah.
those gaps. But then also, I think too, of some are called to be teachers, some are called to be apostles, some are called, and it goes on. And it paints a very good picture of what you're describing here, Tom, that we all have a role to play and we
Hmm.
should consider our work good because that's what it was designed. It's a beautiful picture that Adam and Eve were working in the garden before the fall. They were
Before the
working.
fall. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the things I always say is Christianity is the only religion where work is part of paradise. That's a very significant statement. Every other religion, paradise is getting away from work,
That's
right? For
true.
Christianity, no other religion is work an essential part of paradise.
Would you care to expound upon that, Tom? Obviously, you've
Yeah,
done a
well,
lot of
again,
research in this
yeah.
space.
Well, so if you think about it, this is a question I always ask, and it kind of, I think it's correct. So the new heaven and the new earth will be physically here on this planet when Jesus returns, bringing back the very physical 1,400 mile by 1,400 mile by 1,400 mile cubic New Jerusalem. Going to plant it down here. And in Revelation chapter 20, the angel that's guiding John takes him by the hand and says, "Let me show you the church." And he points to the New Jerusalem. And here's the question that I challenge people on. What we call ministry in the world today, okay, things we call, so what might some of those be? Remedial soup kitchens, crisis marital counseling, getting arsenic out of pumps in Africa somewhere. Um, all of those things, which we call ministry, none of those things will be done in the new heaven and the new earth. I had a pastor friend who was preaching at our church years ago, and he was doing a series of sermons on people's work. And at one point, he stopped and he said, "You know what? I've just realized my job is to introduce people to Jesus. When we get to the new heaven and the new earth, I'm going to have to come work for you guys because there won't be a role for somebody to introduce somebody to Jesus."
Mm.
So I think that gives a different perspective. In other words, when we talk about what's eternal, now obviously the spiritual sharing of the gospel and the being change that ensues, ensuring that that individual will be in eternity is utterly significant. But at the same time, I think this is true. When you get to heaven, I coach HVAC contractor company, and I always tell him, I said, he always laughs at me, but I said, we'll still have to change fan belts in heaven because friction is part of the way God created the world. We'll all that sort of stuff. We'll still have landscapers, but we'll all be doing it in the presence of God. Trash will have to be collected. Hopefully it won't be on the streets. It'll be nice, tidy little containers, but someone's still got to do the job of removing it, selecting it, recycling it, whatever it is that will be done in heaven. But all that stuff will still be done, or it wouldn't be a flourishing place. It'll be, and this is also a fun thing, our work will be absent sin, absent the curse. So there won't, we won't, what we dislike about work, I suspect you probably like most of what you do for work. But then there's those two or three people and, the issues and the cash flow problems and what have you. That stuff's gone, right? No sin, no curse. Just able to do work in the presence of God. That's good work. Important, meaningful.
It is. And I think, and I would defer to you, just in hearing you talk, I'm so reminded of how finite our thinking really is. Just
Oh,
because
yeah.
we tend to be so busy. And for those that are just listening, I put that in quotes because Tom and I were laughing about that before we hit the record
Yeah.
button. So, Tom, whenever we were talking, this goes back to the work conversation, being intentional. In Colossians, we hear about, hey, work for God and be
Yeah.
intentional with the way that you work and you present yourself to Him through the work that you do. I would love to really hone in on this idea and conversation around whenever I asked how you were doing, I made a joke about busy, and you said, I'm slow and deliberate. And I was also reminded of Terry Looper's book that he wrote, Sacred Pace. And it was very,
Oh yeah. Yeah. I know Terry.
yeah, it's a great book. And whenever he started his most recent company, he promised himself that he wouldn't work more than 40 hours a week. And so the conversation that you've always had is this importance of faith and work. What would you say? How would you encourage somebody? Let's do it this way. How would you encourage somebody to rethink the way that they approach life from a godly perspective to work well, but then also change the course and be slow and deliberate, not in a lazy way, but in an
Not in a lazy way, for
intentional
sure.
way?
Yeah, yeah. No, so another phrase I say to people, they say, because that's the new how you doing is, hey, you been busy? And I just it surprises, and then we're supposed to, of course, very proudly say, well, of course I've been busy,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm important.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned to say in response to that is, well, no, I'm really not busy, but I get a lot of really important things done. And I think it's kind of that intentionality.
Hmm.
I coach, I work part-time. I coach about 30 Christian CEOs, helping them together, create flourishing companies that serve their communities well. And one of the things I tell people when they're considering joining is I say probably about 20 or 30% of what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing. You just don't know it. And we just get on that treadmill and we get running and things are flying. And so I teach a workshop for the convene groups around the country. And that's one of the questions that I start out with, which is what are all the roles that God has called you to? So in my case, it's father, it's grandfather, it's husband, it's now convene coach, used to be CEO. It's taking care of my physical conditioning, taking care of my spiritual growth. All of those are roles that God's called me to. So exercise we do in there is to take each of the roles, list them out, and ask yourself one question: what are the two things which, if I did them regularly, would make me a better father, a better grandfather, better golfer, heaven forbid, etc. But the idea is, so figure out, don't just think about, because where we do that kind of work, that kind of thinking around our jobs,
Hmm.
but we don't give the same intentionality to where we know where we want our companies to go. We want, or what we want to get out of our job at the end of the year, but we don't necessarily know what we want the relationship to be with our children when they're 15, right? And
Hmm.
so, anyway, the idea then is figure out all of those callings and allocate an appropriate amount of time to each one. And that's really is I call it being intentional, getting your kind of having a picture, a vision, if you will. That's why I call my company Vision Planners. Have a vision for where you want to end up, and then begin to do the things. Do you know the Avett brothers by any chance? They're kind of a bluegrass group.
Not ringing a bell right
Uh,
at the moment.
they have a song. You probably know some of their songs, but one of the lines in one of their songs says, "Decide what to be and go be it." I think that's a great line. Decide what to be and go be it. Right? But
Absolutely.
it takes time to do that. Intentionality.
So, with that intentionality, Tom, what would you, because I feel like calling really gets thrown around a lot.
Sure.
Quite, how would you decide what you want to be and go be it? I love that because it does take action. It does take thought because you have to think about what you want to be and then you have to go do it. So you have to execute and be intentional.
Hmm.
Exactly what
Right.
we've been talking about. So, utilizing that thought, how do you bring, for instance, an employee that could potentially be listening to this podcast, this conversation?
Yeah.
How do you bring calling into your coaching as well as
Hmm.
your studies, if you will, within your books? Because obviously
Yeah.
you've talked a lot about your faith in the marketplace.
Yeah. So the books are and I'll come back to that in some question. The books are primarily for a discipler. They're good books to read as a disciple. They're full of great content. But the angle from which it's written is how have I learned to do just what you're asking? How have I learned to help Addison think about his job in service to God? And so there are principles. In the first book, it's basically who are you? And the answer is to that is you're an image bearer of God created as a worker. Number two, uh, what is your kingdom purpose? And so that's there. So image bearers have kingdom purpose. They've been put in the kingdom for a reason. What is yours? And so, do you know Patrick Lencioni? Are you familiar
I
with that?
do. Very familiar.
Yeah, okay. Well, Patrick's got gobs of books. I can't, and he always changes the name, so you think he's got twice as many. But he had one originally called The Three Signs of a Bad Job, I think it was. And
Mhm.
now it's been rebranded as The Secrets to Employee Engagement, I believe. But basically, one of those three things is help your employees understand who they're important to. And that's a very profound idea. So I coach a company that does beverage equipment installation and maintenance for convenience stores. Okay. Bunch of blue collar guys wearing boots and turning wrenches. And when I started first coaching those guys, they didn't really have any sense of why would God care about that. But then I asked the question I asked a little bit a few minutes ago, what would happen if nobody did what you do? So imagine your morning commute. I don't know what if you have one or what your tendency is, but awful lot of people depend on stopping at the Quick Trip here in Atlanta and getting a donut and a cup of coffee or a Slurpee or whatever it is. It's part of their routine. It's part of their flourishing. And so now when they are onboarding new clients, they draw that picture for them. And they say, when you go in to fix a coffee machine at a Quick Trip or a racetrack or a BP gas station, whatever it might be, recognize that as a result of the excellence of your work, 2 million people in Atlanta will have a better day, right? That's what's flourishing. So again, they're a part of the mosaic. They're the little pink thing down here in the right corner, right? But at the end of the day, just take that out, right? There's no convenience stores in America. And it's like, well, that's not as good of a place. That's not as good of a place. Anyway, so and then the third question, and this drinks into the second book a lot more. The third question is how then shall you implement your kingdom purpose? So that's the framework of the first book. Second book is about the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and which in my mind, my experience has gotten a bad rap. Nobody, the psalmist said, "How I love the law," and I always thought they're blowing smoke. They don't love the law. What are they talking about? Come on,
Yeah.
stop sucking up. But when you understand it properly as the guide to wisely doing everything in life, right? When you read the way Jesus interprets it, everybody thinks Jesus changed it up in the Sermon on the Mount, but all he's doing is talking about the way it was intended. And it was kicked off by Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 4 when he says this. He's giving the speech. The speech is here's the 10 words, which, by the way, is the only time God ever spoke to a multitude, was the 10 words. So it's pretty important,
Mhm.
right? He says, see, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me. Be careful to obey them when you are entering the land to take possession of it, for this will show your wisdom in the sight of the people. who will see all these, we can use the loose term applications, who will see all these applications and say, what a wise and an understanding people. And I think when Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, let your light so shine before men that they see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven, he's echoing the same thought. So
Mm.
basically, Moses is sending them in. We're going to clear out this world. We're going to have a blank sheet of paper, and I'm now giving you a constitution. And if you think about it, you think about the opportunity we have. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a place where uh, correct authority is honored, where everybody obeys laws, where everybody does everything in their power to work for the flourishing of others. Everybody keeps all of the commitments that they make. Nobody tries to take what does not belong to them and learns to share what they have been given for the benefit of others. And everybody tells you the truth all the time. I'd settle for that. Uh,
Yeah.
right? And
Amen on
and then
that.
finally, and then finally, nobody tries to recreate the world for their advantage. I mean,
Yeah,
that's right. That's what the Decalogue is. Who would not like that place? I think that'd be an awesome place to live. Right.
absolutely.
So I don't know why it gets anyway. So the second book, Equipping Christians for Kingdom Obedience, really fleshes out that third category is how do you be a coffee installer? How do you be a trash collector? How do you be a doctor? How do you be, in other words, what's the wisdom? And wisdom is nothing more. I teach a class on it. We call it the settled application of God's law to daily life. Just learning what it means. It affects the way I tithe, it affects the way I drive, it affects the way I deal with my wife, my grandkids. Everything about the way we live can be informed by a proper understanding of the breadth of the Decalogue in the Hebrew Bible.
You've talked about, hey, the first step is to identify the roles that you have as an
Mhm.
individual and then progress from there. Decide how would the Ten Commandments and currently today, how would that infuse the way that Christians should think about their work and responsibilities that they have?
Yeah, so just a couple of examples. The eighth commandment, thou shalt not steal, right? In its see he doesn't reinterpret it. What he does, he criticizes the way the Pharisees interpret it to make it easy to obey. And so when he says in Philippians, or the wise young ruler says, well, all my life I've never stolen. Well, because for him, stealing would be me to go into your house at night and pick up your TV and walk out the door, right? Well, I haven't done that. So to that sense, I'm perfectly righteous. But basically, what thou shalt not steal means it's interpreted or applied. Are you familiar with the rules or about gleaning in the Older Testament?
Not so
That concept?
much.
Okay, so there's all over the place. It basically says if you are a farmer and you own a vineyard, do not take every last grape out of the vineyard, but leave some in the vineyard for the less fortunate. Or if you're taking a cart away and a big bunch of grapes falls off, leave it there, right? And so what's the principle? The principle is not everything that you've been given by God is for your consumption. Thou shalt not
Mm.
steal, right? So to steal in that is for you to glean, to pull every last grape off the field and leave nothing for those that God has asked you to take care of. And so what does that do? That changes the way I think about my tipping. I'm a big tipper. Well, I'll take my
Mhm.
grandkids. We do it every weekend, some group of my grandkids, and we'll go spend $60 at Waffle House, and I'll leave a $30 tip, right? Because that person needs that $30 more than I do, right? And God's been gracious with me. I mean, I could put it in my 401k, and I'm not saying I'm not throwing away all my money. I've got a responsible, respectable retirement, but it's just the world flourishes when we think that way, right? Another example, thou shalt not kill, is the Pharisees interpreted as actually taking the life of, putting a knife through your heart. in order that you get liable to the court. Well, Jesus says, well, no, anybody who's angry with his brother or sister. And so one of the applications of in the law is you are required to have a fence around your roof. Okay, so I suspect you don't have a fence around your roof. Am I right? So you're a
Just for the
lawbreaker.
dogs in the backyard.
You're a lawbreaker. Well, what's that all about? Well, because they entertained on roofs, right? And so basically, what it's saying is you are responsible for the flourishing and the care of lives entrusted to you, right? So we don't do that. I do not have a fence around my roof. But if I had a pool in my backyard or a community pool, what do? We put a fence around it.
Mm.
Same concept, right? Thou shalt not kill doesn't mean only don't take the life of, it means doing everything in your care. So that affects the way I drive. I obey speed limits. I stop at stop signs. I slow down at yellow lights. I don't cross white lines. It doesn't make me better than the next guy, but what it does, it basically says when I drive, I should be supremely conscious of the safety of others, right? Because one of the guides to life is Jesus tells me don't kill, which means don't treat carelessly the lives that God's entrusted to your care. And in the book we go into every one of the Ten Commandments is kind of, we develop it fully through and those kind of pictures. But that's what wisdom is, right? Wisdom is basically making informed biblical decisions about the way you dress, the way you drive, the way you consume, the way you invest, all those things, the way you run your business, the way you do your job.
That is true. Luckily, I work from home and I don't have to deal with traffic every day. But I would say if I
Yeah,
did, I would need some Holy Spirit in my life for sure.
right. Well, I must admit, if my wife listens to this, she'll laugh. Drives her crazy. What are you stopping to stop that for? We're gonna go. I have a Tesla, just got it about not quite a year ago, which got self-driving, right? And you can actually choose in there. You can choose it self-drives you as chill, standard, hurry, or maniac, or ludicrous speed, or something. I forget what. So I choose standard. It basically is a responsible. I've seen Teslas. I think my son has ludicrous speed on his. And even then, if it's not turning fast enough, he'll take it off self-driving and go crazy. I think about it this way: it's part of a relaxed life. How many, maybe 10 times a day you hit a stop sign. Just stop, take a breath, thank God that you can, and then move on, right? That's back to our hurry discussion. We're in such a hurry to get somewhere, and we don't know where we are. We don't know where we've been. This way, it's what did you ever read Ferdinand the Bull to your kids? Stop and
Hmm.
smell the roses.
Yeah,
Stop and smell the roses.
absolutely. And if people aren't going at the green light after the red light turns, we're automatically
Beep.
honking at the person in front because they're not taking it for the point 0.1 millisecond like a race car driver would, you know?
Right. Yeah, there used to be a joke that says, how do you define a millisecond in New York City? It's the time between the light turning green and the horn being applied.
That is a very good analogy. I've actually
Yeah.
driven a toy hauler in New York, and I would say that I
Oh
made
my.
it. I survived, but I don't want to go back. I'll go back to New York, just not with an RV.
Yeah, yeah. Get a Waymo to drive you around.
Yes, absolutely. I do think that's intentional, Tom, because I think back to how practical you're making it sound for people to really apply their faith to everything that they do.
Right.
And it's really a beautiful thing whenever you actually take time to listen to the birds or take a walk in a park or when you're in traffic, taking a breath and thanking God for giving you just 30 more seconds of relaxation that you probably need to decompress.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, you just build those things into the system. And again, it goes back to you had asked a question to me a minute ago I was thinking it had something to do with the question about what is your kingdom purpose, but oh, I know what it was. I was talking to you about the my dissertation study. And when people begin to think about this, so these men that I did qualitative research about, once they could articulate that God cared about their driving, that God cared about their habits of tithing or tipping, their the way they invested. What you know, in other words, when they see the bigger picture, all of a sudden, it's not oppressive. It basically brings light and the face of God into all those parts of their lives that hitherto they thought were their own private domain, right? And what it culminates in wisdom. You know, wisdom, when you think of someone who's wise, someone that you've met that you would consider wise, you're probably not thinking about a frantic, out of control person. You're thinking about someone, the kind of person that if you had a crisis, you'd probably call because you knew that person is going to remain calm and probably have some good advice for you, right?
Absolutely.
Um, yeah.
I think back to a conversation that I had just last week at a consultation, and I was actually sharing a story of an entrepreneur that did not get investments from an investor at her
Mm,
church. And without hesitating, the individual that I was talking to said, it's not his risk model. And in that simple, you talk about somebody that's being wise. In that simple sentence, it wasn't overpowering. It was just, it's not his risk model. And that completely, I was advocating for the entrepreneur in my head, and in my response, I was like, man, he should have
mhm.
invested. He should have invested. And whenever he said it's not his risk model, I just can't get it out of my head, because before that conversation, I was thinking about emotional maturity.
Mm,
And it really was a practical example for me to be able to hear one side of the story, which was from the entrepreneur, but then also have a disassociated person very bluntly and plainly say it wasn't his risk model. And I hadn't heard it put like
yeah,
that, but just the
that's right.
practicality of how he said it, and then how it just, honestly, the barriers, the walls that I had hypothetically put up around this situation that this entrepreneur went through, it just made him crumble down. And then I
Yeah,
started thinking about it of, well, yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Well, you know, it's back to this phrase, the settled application of God's law to daily life is what wisdom is. You take a lot of decisions. So when I get up in the morning, I hop in my car and drive to the end of the street. I don't ask myself, should I stop at the stop sign at the end of the street? That's settled. Now, sometimes I don't, granted, right? I don't know, I'm not always true to my choices.
That California
Uh,
roll.
yeah, you know, am I going to drive the speed limit? Well, no, yeah, I'm going to drive the speed limit. It's just, yes, that decision was made last Tuesday. We don't have to bring that up again. You know, when it comes to, you know, they throw up the tip thing and you put some money into the young lady's thing. I've decided I'm giving her money. Now I understand some people think that's offensive, and you know, I'm not saying my decisions are correct, but basically I've taken the time to reflect on the aspects of things that are going to appear daily, multiple times a day in my life, and make a decision. And when you make the decision, you know, then at the time that it comes, you know, I'm running late for a golf tee time, and the light turned yellow. Sometimes I'll go right through that, maybe even go through the red light, right? But I know in my mind, you should have left on time. And so it just causes that. Another thing I do, it's I don't know, maybe silly. I hope it doesn't sound boastful, but I'm not we don't know each other well, but I suspect the first couple of conversations we had, you probably didn't say, that's the humblest man I've ever met. You're smiling. It's just
Oh,
not. That's humility is not something I was born with, but it's a problem, right? I decided that I've got to do things to constantly remind myself. So part of the stopping at stop signs is just to take that 15 seconds, 10 seconds and say, you're a man under authority. You're not who you think you are. I make it a
Mhm.
point of opening doors. If you were two steps behind me, I'm going to hold the door and let you go through. Again, why? Because it's my reminder from God. I added a new one. You know when you go on the urinal and you've got the tall urinals and the low urinals?
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody. I pee in the low urinal. Um, and why? Well, again, it's you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's just some disciplines. That's 10 times in a day that the thought crosses my mind that you need to be humble. And I need that. I need that reminder because if I didn't have it, I'd read bios like you read of mine and I'd be really impressed.
absolutely. To be clear, I didn't not think you were not humble, and I didn't not think that you were arrogant either. So it's just a double-edged
Right.
sword
No,
here.
well, hopefully it's working.
Yeah,
Hopefully
absolutely.
it's like I don't know what the comparable statement is here, but one of my mentors in seminary what used to say, we need to be fools for Christ in a scholarly way. So I need to be proud in a humble way because I am proud of what God has enabled me to do.
Absolutely.
Um, but it's that second proviso that has enabled me to do that keeps it a little bit in check, hopefully.
Absolutely. So, Tom, one thing that you were saying, whenever you were referring to the blue collar workers, whenever they
Mm.
started to realize that they really had intentionality with the work, I feel like I relate that to the ant, right? The whole
Hmm.
ecosystem falls whenever you think about the ant. And
Have
it's
you seen
a,
that the
yes, it's just
they did?
fascinating to me.
Yeah, yeah, seemingly insignificant. COVID was, of course, for all of us. What is a supply chain,
Right.
and why can't I get I go to the store and what do you mean there's no grapes? Well, the truck driver couldn't make it last Tuesday. We got no grapes.
Yeah, absolutely. But it also brings out this idea of your heartfelt emotion, right? It's a relationship with God. It's not a checkbox
Hmm.
religious
Yeah,
mindset. And whenever you do start to understand that your all work has value, even as mundane it might seem to
precisely.
you, it does have value. And then also, it just is a reminder to me to double down on this idea that God does care and He wants a relationship with us, and it's very intentional. And we see that throughout the scriptures. I would just love it, Tom, if you would elaborate on this idea of religion versus relationship, because I think that oftentimes
Yeah.
that gets really overcomplicated. And I feel like we're debunking a lot of that today, but I'd just like to specifically laser on that for a moment.
Yeah, well, I guess if you kind of have laser, if how do you perceive God? Some people perceive God as an ogre that needs to be placated, right? Is one perspective, right? And so they fear him in a negative way, not in a positive way. And so they try like crazy to follow all the rules. Some, as a person, you can trick. So the Pharisees, all right. So we're gonna dumb down the rules, right? And make it so that the rich young ruler, or whatever the parable is, he's, well, I've kept all that from my youth. Yeah, according to your interpretation, if you try to skinny him down. Um, but if you think of God as, I don't know, this is maybe my worldview, as a CEO of the best place to work in your town, which is honored and loved by all the community because of all the fantastic things that that you do, that it does to cause the flourishing of the community, and you get to be part of that. It's like working for Chick-fil-A, right? Everybody picks on it, makes fun of them, and don't like their political stance now and then. But at the end of the day, they're going to go buy a chicken sandwich because it's really good.
Absolutely. Because they're not in the chicken business, they're in the people business.
They're in the relationship business.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're in the. It was the famous thing that they say is my pleasure. And I heard Dan Cathy speaking one time, and he said it took him 10 years to get that into the culture. My pleasure, right? But it's a mindset. I also heard Horst Schultz, who was the CEO of Ritz-Carlton, and this is a statement. They're one of the first training mantras they say to the staff at the Ritz-Carlton, the bellboys, the people that park your car, people that carry your bags upstairs, work behind the counter. He said, folks, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And I think that's a pretty cool world to live in, where
Mm-hmm.
both sides of that spectrum respect and honor that other person. And you talk about the blue collar component, most people don't respect. If you're walking
Yeah.
into the convenience store and there's a guy picking up the trash, you don't think, wow, that's awesome. You don't stop and talk to him, certainly, right? And if he misses a cigarette butt, you're not going to bend down and pick it up. But that's if you begin to think differently about this stuff, that how would God see that? How would is his world more flourishing? So I pick up trash. I'm
Mm-hmm.
walking down the street. I taken my grandkids to breakfast the other day, and there's paper towel on the ground. I don't need to pick it up. There's people that get paid to pick it up. I bent down, picked it up, put it in the trash can. Right? Just because the world is better, God's world is better without trash on the ground. Well, it's just a different. It's a. I don't know. I think it helps me feel better about being in God's world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back, it's just the simple things. It's the simple things that we can do to really, and it's not to just pat ourselves on the back, but it's really just to be intentional about if you were at your house, would you want
Yeah,
you're not paying somebody to pick up trash. Well, you might have a maid. Let me just like excerpt. The general population is going to pick up trash in their own house. And
correct.
I think back to times where honestly, I didn't pick up the trash in that moment.
Hmm.
Maybe it was
Hmm.
pride, maybe it was just a situation. But then I think back and I'm like, man, I should have picked up that piece of trash. And it's just my own conviction of
Hmm.
how would you want your place to look? And I think
Yeah,
back to practically in the marketplace, we all have a
yeah.
job to do. So if I were to take anything from this conversation, which has been great, I feel like there are a lot of nuggets, but just simplifying it to make the world a better place in a simple way that you can today and be
Hmm.
intentional about your conversation with God to figure out how you play a role in the bigger picture.
Yeah. To carry your analogy a step further, it's God's house. God loves the world. He created a masterpiece.
Mhm.
It's got its issues, right? Curse and sin, which
Right.
is going to be gone. But that's the way to think about it. If you're his son, so it's your house, right? And so what would God do? If God were walking down the street, I suspect he'd pick up the trash, right? Um, he certainly wouldn't sneer at the person who was. Let's put it that way.
That's very good. Tom, as we
Yeah.
close out this afternoon, I would love to click on one of the frameworks in your book, and I feel like it does practically tie everything we've discussed together. It's this
Hmm.
idea of being, knowing, and
Oh
doing.
yeah.
I
Right.
would love to make that the last segment as we close out this
Yep.
afternoon.
One of my favorite topics. Yeah, when I teach, so there are 6 frameworks in the second book, which is part of the way I teach. I'm teaching a class on wisdom literature just now. But that particular one, so we talked about Christianity is the only religion where work is part of paradise. I was earlier in this conversation. Here's another thing. Christianity is the only religion that starts with a change to being. So we're tripartite individuals. We have being, we have knowing, and we have doing. My brother-in-law, who's a psychologist, hates when I use say being because they aren't the same, but I like the ring. So being, knowing, and doing. Buddhism starts with knowing. You know things to achieve nirvana and get a relationship to God. Gnosticism's the same way. You know things, which then becomes your entrance into a relationship with God. Islam is a doing religion. You do things in order to gain a relationship with God. Hinduism, if you do things, you come back in the next life in an exalted position. If it's a good dog, you come back as an elephant, or I don't know how that all works. Christianity doesn't do that. Christianity starts when God changes your being. And I think that changes. So we talk about the second book, the Decalogue, that changes the way you think about the law. The law was never given as a means to gain acceptance by God. I think there's that misunderstanding. I think
Mm-hmm.
people think, oh, in the old covenant, you had to keep the law, or that's how you got right with God. Well, no, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. It goes all the way back to Genesis 3. It's
Yeah.
always been redemption by faith. And so in this case, then once the being is changed, right? So the law, in fact, when it was given, the law is given in Deuteronomy, I'm sorry, Exodus chapter 20. Um, but the context of it, he doesn't say, hey, here's 10 rules. If you keep them, I will bring you out of Egypt. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Therefore, you shall have no other gods before me. Being changed, redemption precedes. And then, of course, Paul talks about the renewing of the mind, talks about putting off the old man. There's the change to being, of change to doing. But yeah, being, knowing, and doing, I think is, if you want to understand the law, you've got to first and foremost understand that the law is not your friend until your being has been changed. Once your being has been changed, then you will truly say, how I love the law.
Because it practically makes the world a better place if you truly
Who
apply
wouldn't
it,
want to
like we've
live?
talked
There,
about.
there's there's a chapter in there, and I meant to look it up so I could read it to you, but there's a chapter in there that says, who wouldn't want to live in a world like this? Where
Yeah.
where everybody acted consistent with the essence of the Decalogue. Uh, yeah, it'd be a great place to live. Like I say, just in today's day and age, I'd settle for just people to stop lying to me, right? That would be, that's a good start. Stop lying to me because I don't know what to believe sometimes.
Of course. I think back to one of the Christian radio stations where I am, and they always say, if you can't find a nice person, be one. It's very simple,
That's awesome. That's a good line. If you can't find a nice person, be one.
but it
Yep.
rings true.
Here, here's a picture I give a lot of times to my students. Maybe if you want to be done, where we end with it. So TSA, Atlanta is the busiest airport in the world. Okay, so 4 million people a day, or I don't know what the number is. It's just gobs of people go through there, and we all have to go through a TSA line of some sort. Again, this reflecting on how should I be a traveler in the TSA line. And I just thought about it. Well, so my effort is when I walk up to that TSA agent, I say to them, thank you for being here. Your job helps us to be safer. And they always light up, right? Just, wow, that's nice. And then I'll say, thanks for being here. God bless you. Now, of those 4 million people that go through Atlanta, I'll bet there's two of us who do that. But of those 4 million people, because we're in the Bible Belt, I'll bet 1 million to 2 million of the people that pass through there are Christians.
Mm.
Just suppose
Yeah.
every Christian would do that simple thing. TSA would be It's like Gandhi said, if India obeyed the Sermon on the Mount, all India would be Christian. That's our best testimony. You
Yeah.
don't need to share the gospel with anybody. If just imagine if 1,000 people a day ended, greeted them, thanked them for being here, and said, "Thanks for being here. God bless you." And after a while, they'd start saying, "Who are these God bless you people? I like them."
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of the picture. It's a little nutshell. It's a simple thing, um, but it changes the way we exist in this world, and it's God's world, and we ought to be reflective about how we can make it better.
I'm thinking whenever you said that, I think we all travel at some point,
Sure.
but I think back to we started with identifying your roles, and I really like this idea of identify your practical habits as well.
Yeah.
Because if you identify your practical habits, it's very easy to then see how can I show the love that I have for Jesus through those practical habits, those everyday things that I do, and see how that makes a difference. It's going to make a difference if you are interacting with other people in those practical ways, but also it'll
Hmm.
just reinforce this idea of, hey, I do love Jesus and it's a relationship and he does care.
Yeah, one of the principles I teach in I forget which class it is, but it's in Kingdom Purpose Workshop, which talks about what is your kingdom purpose. And one of them is one of some people's kingdom purpose. Everybody should be to some degree make Jesus attractive. I'm not a big time evangelist. I'm not going to turn to you on an airplane and ask if you're going to go to heaven or what have you. But I try to lead an attractive life. And when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I love the way you handled that sales meeting. I love the way you dealt with that customer complaint, etc." Then you say, "Well, thank Jesus. It wasn't me. I'm a poor sinner, but I try to do what Jesus would do." And then, boom, there's a huge conversation, which is positive because they've already said they're attracted to what you did. And you don't have to have any gimmicks or tricks. You just share your heart about how Jesus has helped you do what it is they find attractive.
Absolutely.
And that's a much easier way to evangelize.
It very much is. You don't have
Yeah.
to be a Bible thumper to make people question how you live your life in an effective and
Yeah.
positive way. Absolutely. Well, Tom, this has been very encouraging. What a great conversation. The last thing that I would ask is how can people learn about you? What's the best place for them to go to learn more about the books that we've referenced, as well as
Yeah.
any other things you're looking forward to in 2026?
Yeah. So I probably vocational-discipleship.com is the book's landing page. So there's a bit more about me. There's information on I think there's going to be stuff about the seminary. So it's vocational-discipleship.com. There's also some information so part of what we do is if it's a business owner or an executive that would be interested in being in a group where this kind of thinking comes together, they can go to convene now, N-O-W, convenenow.com. And that talks about this 80 or 90 groups around the country. Most regions have them. And then just if you're interested, metroatlantaseminary.org is the seminary I teach at. It's got 4 campuses. We've got maybe 250, 300 students system-wide at this point. We're in Baltimore. And it's a different kind of seminary. It's a seminary that is not the kind of place where you go leave for 3 years, bury your head in a book, and then come back. It's very much practicum oriented. And so people who have day jobs can still get through with our seminary degree in a space of 3 years.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. Love to, if anybody would like to connect, be happy to talk. There's also a place through vocational discipleship, vocational-discipleship.com, where people can reach out, and I'll be glad to communicate with them.
Fantastic, Tom. Well, it has been an honor to have a conversation with you this afternoon, Tom. And thank you once again for the wisdom that you've allowed us to tap into this afternoon. For now, that's it for Follower of One. If this has been an encouragement to you, please like it, but also share it with a friend, because practically at the end of the day, we want you to love Jesus, and we want you to show that love through whatever role or occupation you have in the marketplace. So for now, this is Addison Williams, your host of the Follower of One podcast, and we will see you next time. Thank you again, Tom.
My pleasure. It's been fun to be with you, Addison.
As you go, live your faith with intention. Pray, appreciate others, know what you believe, serve others, speak for yourself. These small steps shape a faithful life. Wherever God has placed you, walk it out with courage. You are a missionary.